been screwed by Canada.
Canada, what they've done to our dairy farm workers is a disgrace.
I'm never confident with President Trump. I'm confident with Prime Minister Carney. I know he's going to do his very best, but I don't trust President Trump. He'll say one thing one day and say something else.
We will only sign a deal that's the right deal, that's a good deal for Canada. We're representing Canada, we're standing up for Canada.
What we're witnessing right now is nothing less than economic warfare against American prosperity. These aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. This is a complete overhaul of how America does business with the world. The scale of these tariffs marks the most aggressive trade policy the country has seen since the Great Depression. Every single American consumer will feel the weight of this reckless decision. This isn't a small policy shift, it's a full-blown escalation, affecting most goods globally. While there are significant exceptions that soften the blow on paper, the broader implication is clear. If these tariffs remain in place, we're looking at a reordering of global trade as we know it. At the same time, a major legal battle is underway, challenging the very legitimacy of these tariffs imposed by President Trump. Businesses across the country are scrambling to make sense of how they'll survive under these crushing new costs. The ripple effects are already being felt, from disrupted supply chains to strained manufacturing plants and struggling retail stores from coast to coast. Small businesses that once relied on affordable imports are now facing impossible decisions: absorb huge losses or hike prices and risk losing customers. The irony is almost unbearable. A president who vowed to make America great again is actively dismantling the very economic foundations that made the country prosperous in the first place. Decades of international trade relationships are collapsing in real time, and it's American workers who will ultimately bear the brunt of this dangerous gamble. Before we dig deeper into the truth behind these tariffs and Canada's sharp countermeasures, make sure to hit subscribe and stay with us for clear, fearless analysis. Big American corporations are already reporting massive losses from these policies. In just one quarter, General Motors lost $1.1 billion, Ford lost $800 million, and Apple is forecasting a $1.1 billion tariff cost for the upcoming quarter. Stanley Black & Decker expects an $800 million hit this year alone. These are huge numbers that directly impact American companies' bottom lines. But the real danger is what consumers don't see. There's no line on your receipt that says, "Here's your tariff cost." It's a hidden tax on American families, and it's about to become painfully obvious. When giants like GM and Ford are bleeding billions, that pain trickles down fast. These aren't foreign corporations absorbing the cost. They're American companies taking the hit from American policies. The tragedy is that most Americans have no idea how much extra they're already paying for everyday items. Groceries, gas, coffee, kids' shoes, car repairs. All of it costs more. And all of it is a direct result of Washington choosing to wage economic war on its own citizens. The president insists these tariffs are bringing billions into the country, claiming they're a strategy to force companies to bring manufacturing back to the US. He calls America the hottest economy in the world. But the money isn't coming from foreign countries. It's coming from American importers, our own businesses, writing checks to the US government. That's the fundamental lie at the heart of this entire disaster. Every dollar collected through these tariffs comes straight from American companies, making this one of the largest tax increases on American commerce in generations. The promise that foreign nations would foot the bill was a fantasy, and now that illusion is being crushed by reality. Meanwhile, those promised manufacturing jobs, they're not appearing, and they won't anytime soon. Building factories takes years. Training skilled workers takes time. Developing supply chains takes decades. You can't just snap your fingers and create an entire industrial base out of thin air. And as this unfolds, American consumers are stuck paying premium prices for the same products they used to buy affordably. Those billions flowing into government revenue. That's money being siphoned directly from American families. Money that could have gone toward groceries, vacations, or college savings. And companies now face a brutal choice. Move production to the US at enormous expense and delays, or immediately pass massive price hikes onto American consumers. Either way, it's the American public who loses, while politicians in Washington claim victory. What's the point of being the hottest economy in the world if your own citizens can't afford to participate in that prosperity? And even if some jobs do return, here's the cruelest deception. Modern manufacturing isn't what it used to be. It relies heavily on automation, AI, and robotics, not the blue-collar assembly line jobs politicians love to promise. Even if companies like Intel or Apple build new facilities in the US, they'll be staffed mostly by machines, not workers. The jobs that do exist require highly skilled engineers and technicians, not displaced manufacturing workers who've been promised opportunities that don't match their skill sets. The American worker is being asked to pay more for everything, with the vague promise of jobs that may never materialize. And if they do, they'll require specialized training and education that many workers simply don't have access to. So in the end, this trade war, sold as a patriotic economic strategy, is costing Americans more, delivering less, and gambling with the long-term stability of our economy. The impact of these tariffs is already being felt, and it's hitting American families hard. Prices are rising across the board, from electronics and cars to appliances and countless other goods that rely on semiconductors. The gap between political promises and economic reality has never been wider. And right now, American consumers are caught in the crossfire of a serious miscalculation. If Ontario were its own country, which no one's suggesting, it would still rank as the United States' third largest trading partner. That's how vital Canada is to the US economy. President Trump seems to forget that we rely heavily on Canadian resources, high-grade nickel, aluminum from Quebec, and much more. These aren't just trade items, they're essential materials that power America's industries. As Trump raises tariffs, some Canadian leaders are calling for a firm response, matching tariffs dollar for dollar. In their view, if the US is willing to hit Canada, then Canada should hit back just as hard. The truth is, America just picked a fight with one of its most dependable suppliers of the critical materials that fuel our economy. Canada's high-grade nickel is crucial for electric vehicle batteries, aerospace production, and military technology. Quebec's aluminum is a cornerstone of our auto industry, construction sector, and defense manufacturing. Without these resources, US production would face serious shortages within months. There are no easy replacements. China dominates global nickel production, but their quality is inconsistent and their politics unpredictable. Russia has the reserves, but sanctions rule them out. Australia and Indonesia have the raw materials, but high shipping costs and logistical issues make them impractical for most American manufacturers. Canadian Premier Doug Ford understands what's at stake. Decades of trade partnership are being threatened by a single, short-sighted decision. The minerals flowing south from Canada are the foundation of American manufacturing strength. Yet Washington is now treating this vital relationship as disposable. This comes in the wake of the US imposing a 35% tariff on Canadian goods not covered by the new trade agreement, CUSMA. In response, Canadian Minister Dominic LeBlanc appeared on American television, calmly laying out his government's position. His message was clear: Canada is willing to continue working toward a solution and is committed to maintaining a strong trade relationship, even in the face of economic aggression. Canadian diplomacy is showing a level of professionalism and maturity that puts Washington to shame. While Trump escalates tensions and undermines alliances, Canadian officials are taking the high road, showing patience, responsibility, and a genuine desire to work through these issues constructively. Trade Minister LeBlanc and his team remain engaged with American officials, despite being met with tariff threats that would justify immediate retaliation. Their restraint and commitment to dialogue highlight the difference between serious governance and impulsive political theater. Even American business leaders must be cringing as they watch their government throw diplomacy out the window, while Canadian officials maintain composure and professionalism. Reasonable US trade representatives, like Ambassador Greer and Secretary Lutnick, are stuck trying to implement policies that go against basic economic sense and weaken America's credibility in global negotiations. And when President Trump publicly claims, "I don't need Canada," the absurdity is obvious. That would mean not needing Premier Smith's oil, Premier Moe's potash and uranium, Ontario's high-grade nickel, or the many Canadian goods that quietly power the American economy every day. Ontario alone, just one Canadian province, buys more American products than countries like China, Japan, the UK, or France. Saskatchewan's potash supports American agriculture, keeping food prices stable. Their uranium powers nuclear plants that keep lights on across the country. Alberta's energy helps keep US gas prices lower than they would be if we relied solely on domestic oil or volatile Middle Eastern imports. Canada's purchases of American machinery, technology, and consumer goods support millions of jobs, from Michigan's auto plants to Silicon Valley tech firms. When Premier Ford points out that Canada buys more American goods than several major economies combined, he's highlighting a truth that too many Americans overlook. Our closest ally and best customer is being treated like an adversary. The tragic irony. Trump's tariff policies are alienating the most loyal, stable, and beneficial trading partner the United States has ever had. For decades, Canadian provinces have consistently chosen American products over cheaper options from Asia and Europe. That loyalty is now being repaid with hostility. This isn't just a diplomatic rift, it's an economic, self-inflicted wound. Destroying this relationship doesn't just hurt Canada. It strips the US of its most reliable supply of essential resources and its most dependable export market. Markets are already reacting. All major US indices slipped on Friday, the sharpest decline in months, as investors realized the tariffs are coming and that the rates are even higher than expected for many countries. Economic uncertainty is setting in fast. Canada is now facing a 35% tariff on goods not covered under the US-Mexico-Canada trade agreement. This marks a sharp jump from the original 25% rate. Until recently, the markets in the US had remained strong, largely because investors believed President Trump wouldn't actually follow through with these so-called taco trade tariffs. There was a belief he'd back down, as he often had before. But this escalation from 25% to 35% is more than just a hike in cost. It signals a deeper issue, a pattern of broken promises and increasingly strained diplomatic relations. American businesses that had prepared their operations around the 25% rate are now scrambling. Supply chains are being reworked on the fly, pricing strategies are being rewritten, and cost projections are being thrown out the window. Canadian exporters, already struggling to remain competitive in the American market, are now being driven to consider long-term alternatives. European and Asian markets are looking more attractive by the day. The unpredictable nature of US trade policy has made it nearly impossible for businesses on both sides of the border to make stable, long-term decisions. This decision hits everyday Americans where it hurts, in their homes and wallets. Whether it's Canadian lumber for home construction, agricultural goods for your dinner table, or energy to heat your home, these essentials are about to get significantly more expensive. What makes it worse is that many of the affected goods weren't even part of formal trade agreements. They were part of long-standing, mutually beneficial arrangements built over years of trust and cooperation. American importers who built businesses around Canada's reliability and product quality are now facing a brutal choice: absorb devastating losses or walk away from partnerships that have supported jobs and communities for decades. For months now, tariff headlines have been making waves, but the actual impact is only now being felt. That's because there's often a gap between a tariff announcement and its real-world consequences. And with a president who frequently reverses himself, many assumed this would blow over. But it didn't. These new tariffs took effect yesterday. Goods being loaded onto ships today will arrive in the US in about a month. Add in customs clearance and ground transportation, and it could take up to 2 months before those items hit store shelves. But make no mistake, American companies are already paying those higher costs today. We're now watching an economic time bomb slowly ticking toward American households. The container ships departing now are packed with goods that will soon cost significantly more. It's a slow-moving conveyor belt of inflation that will hit every family over the coming weeks and months. Retailers are urgently doing the math, trying to figure out how much of this they can absorb before passing it on to shoppers. But they're running out of room. as shipping costs soar and customs officials struggle to process new tariff rules. Delays and added costs are piling up. Trucking companies, too, will face higher expenses, which will be passed down the chain. At the store level, managers are already bracing for tough conversations with customers about sudden price hikes on everyday essentials. The truth is painful. American families are in the final days of pre-tariff pricing. Most don't yet realize their spending power is about to take a major hit, thanks to their own government's economic choices. There's no line on a receipt that tells you what portion of your bill is due to tariffs. Many companies have been working hard to shield consumers from those costs, either by rushing shipments in before the tariff deadline or simply absorbing the extra expense themselves. But now, we're starting to see prices creep up. A little here, a little there. Reuters has been tracking companies that have openly raised prices due to tariffs. And while many corporations have tried to protect consumers, that effort is quickly becoming unsustainable. In a desperate move, some companies spent millions rushing inventory to beat the tariff hikes. Warehouses are overflowing with goods that were shipped early at inflated rates. These emergency stockpiles cost a fortune, and smaller businesses simply couldn't afford to do the same. Now, many small and mid-sized businesses are teetering on the edge, operating at break-even or worse. They can't absorb another wave of tariff-related losses. Public companies, too, have limits. Their legal responsibility to shareholders means they can't continue taking losses indefinitely. So the next step is inevitable: passing those costs on to consumers or cutting jobs and benefits to stay afloat. What makes all of this especially frustrating is the irony behind it. American businesses are draining their resources to absorb the impact of policies that were supposedly designed to help them. The promise was that foreign nations would pay the price, but that was never true. It's American companies and American families footing the bill. Economists are warning that this latest tariff escalation will only make things worse, potentially accelerating inflation and slowing job growth. And that concern is echoed by business leaders and analysts alike. Yes, the effects will take time to spread through the economy, but the early signs are already here. Companies have held off as long as they could. But that can't last forever. Many companies stocked up on critical goods before the tariffs officially went into effect, hoping the measures would eventually be lifted, as has happened before in some cases. For example, Apple secured exemptions for many of its electronics. But this delayed impact has created a false sense of security, an illusion that these policies aren't causing immediate harm. In reality, the damage is quietly building, like pressure behind a dam that's about to burst. Behind the scenes, American executives are making difficult decisions, trying to hold pricing steady while their input costs soar. The strategy of stockpiling inventory was never meant to be permanent. It required enormous capital, storage space, and logistical planning, luxuries that many businesses simply don't have. Now, companies that manage to build emergency inventories are realizing that competitors who couldn't afford to do the same will be forced to raise prices first. This creates unfair advantages and market distortions. In response to this uncertainty, many foreign suppliers are starting to shift their focus away from the US. They're building stronger trade relationships with buyers in Canada, Europe, and Asia. Meanwhile, American consumers are enjoying a temporary illusion of price stability, one that will vanish the moment stockpiles run out and normal supply chains resume. Some of the most advanced American companies are already adapting for what comes next. They're rethinking sourcing strategies, building new relationships with international suppliers, and preparing for a future where doing business in America is simply more expensive and less predictable. This climate of instability has created extreme uncertainty, even more than what we saw during the COVID-19 pandemic, according to some economists. At one point, President Trump's trade actions generated more economic uncertainty than the virus itself. An incredible statement, considering the global disruption caused by the pandemic. Now, the only certainty in global trade is more uncertainty, and businesses are being forced to adapt to this new normal. 7 months into his term, nearly a year after descending the golden escalator, Trump finally rolled out these tariffs, but almost immediately, the rates began shifting. The comparison to the pandemic is striking. COVID created chaos, yes, but it was an external force. The current uncertainty, on the other hand, is being manufactured by our own government. During the pandemic, uncertainty eventually eased with the arrival of vaccines and clearer public health measures. But tariff uncertainty keeps growing because trade policy decisions are being made on impulse, not logic or strategy. American CEOs who successfully led their companies through the pandemic are now facing a more unpredictable threat. At least during COVID, they had some control. Now, they're dealing with policy changes that make long-term planning almost impossible. This affects everything, from billion-dollar investment decisions by multinational firms to local shop owners unsure of how to price next month's inventory. The financial markets, which managed to recover after the pandemic, are now being shaken again, not by global crises, but by political choices made in Washington. And families who had just begun to recover from pandemic job losses and economic setbacks are now facing a fresh round of financial uncertainty, this time with no clear end in sight. The biggest tragedy is this: the pandemic eventually led to economic recovery, greater resilience, and smarter business practices. In contrast, tariff-related uncertainty is actively dismantling the international relationships and supply chain systems that helped enable that recovery in the first place. As markets prepared to reopen on Monday, analysts braced for more volatility. If Friday's performance was any indication, things were about to get worse. US indices like the Dow, S&P 500, and NASDAQ saw their sharpest declines in months as investors finally realized the tariffs were real and higher than expected. Wall Street didn't mince words. The message was clear: these policies are a disaster. Investors are pulling out of American markets because they see the long-term damage coming. The Dow, S&P, and NASDAQ all posted significant losses as large institutions recalculated what this trade war would mean for corporate profits. Pension funds, managing retirement savings for millions of Americans, watched their values shrink. International investors are quietly advising clients to reduce exposure to US markets, not because of weak economic fundamentals, but because unpredictable trade policy makes any kind of risk assessment nearly impossible. This market slide isn't just a temporary dip, it's a warning sign, a clear signal from some of the world's most sophisticated financial experts that these trade policies are dragging down American growth. Mutual funds loaded with shares in import-reliant companies are bracing for a brutal earnings season as the real costs of these tariffs become impossible to hide. And as stock values fall, so do the retirement savings of everyday American workers. 401k, accounts that were finally recovering post-pandemic, are now under threat again, this time due to policy decisions that were supposed to protect them. The painful irony? The markets that once celebrated Trump's election are now punishing the very economic policies he championed. Investors believed the promises, but they're reacting now to the harsh reality. Currently, prohibited transshipment practices defy practical enforcement, and this is baffling importers. Lydia, can you break down why that's the case? Absolutely. Transshipment is essentially a form of evasion, companies routing goods from, say, China through another country, labeling them made in Vietnam, and then importing them into the US to sidestep higher tariffs. That practice is illegal, and it comes with serious penalties, both criminal and financial. Yet now, instead of outright prohibition, the USTR-US Trade Representative has introduced a 40% tariff on these transshipped goods. This shift demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of how modern global trade actually works. Transshipment has existed for decades. It has been a legitimate business strategy for navigating complex trade rules. Suddenly criminalizing these practices, then punishing them with exorbitant tariffs, puts businesses in an impossible bind. Companies with legitimate, multi-country supply chains are being punished for practices that were historically legal. The new 40% penalty essentially legalizes formerly prohibited behavior, but makes it prohibitively expensive for US importers. Customs officials are struggling to keep up with these rapid rule changes, leading to shipping delays and bottlenecks at ports and airports. This compliance whirlwind forces businesses to rely on expensive legal teams just to figure out what rules apply each week. In response, international suppliers are shifting to more stable buyers in places like Canada or Europe. The result? Trade that should be routine is now a legal minefield, benefiting lawyers and compliance consultants instead of businesses. So who actually benefits from this announcement? It goes beyond manufacturing in America or America first. Politically, it's not just about reshoring jobs. It affects international relationships too. Yes, companies like Samsung and TSMC are investing billions in US chip manufacturing facilities. But those decisions were made long before these tariffs. They're based on smart business planning, not political pressure. These facilities take years to build and deploy, so consumers won't benefit from them for a long time. Yet they'll feel higher prices immediately. In effect, foreign companies are being coerced into American investments through tariff threats, a shaky foundation for sustainable industrial growth. They're also being forced to source components from their own US plants, even when global suppliers might be cheaper. That creates an uneven playing field for American firms like Intel. Sure, there may be high-paying jobs in those new facilities, but American consumers and businesses will foot the bill through permanently inflated product prices. Let's also talk about Canada. As I've said, Canada's high-grade nickel, aluminum from Quebec, etc. are essential to US manufacturing, and especially for electric vehicles, aerospace, and defense. I believe personally, not on behalf of any organization, that we should match tariff for tariff, dollar for dollar, and strike back as firmly as possible. That threat of Canadian retaliation should alarm every American business that exports north. Tariffs on US agriculture, manufacturing, and services could devastate farm communities and factory towns that rely on Canadian markets. States like Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, whose industries export machinery, auto parts, and industrial equipment to Canada, could see serious job losses as buyers turn to European and Asian suppliers instead. The economic ties that have enriched border communities for generations could be severed by US policy. Don't forget to subscribe to the Timefold channel and hit like.